Hey friends, welcome to this week's episode of Not Your Mama's Podcast. The title of this episode is Understanding ADHD and Overcoming Symptoms. And I'm so excited. We have Avigail Gimple on to talk all about it. She's a mother of 6. She was diagnosed with ADHD herself. She's a special educator, a lecturer, and author, and we are so excited to have her on the episode today. Abigail, welcome. And for the audience who are just getting to know you for the first time, can you give them a little bit about yourself and, how you kind of got to where you are today?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's such a pleasure talking with you, and you and I certainly could bond over the mom role that we both share.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I wasn't myself diagnosed with ADHD, but
Oh,
I probably would have been had they been diagnosing people with ADHD back in the dinosaur days when the world wasn't in color yet, as my kids think.
yeah.
My main story, really, how I got into ADHD is because, first of all, I did experience ADHD symptoms as a little kid, but as I got older, I really saw that it was much more trauma-based, that I was just, lots was going on in my home. I come from a family of 8, so you think I have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And there was a lot going on, and I was not really available to learn. And that was not, there is no diagnosis unavailable to learn. It looks like all the ADHD symptoms, spacing out, not doing your work, never getting anything completed, but it was just this overloaded brain. And I actually went into a special education with a lot of sympathy for these kind of students, and not just sympathy, but also curiosity about what was going on for them, because I knew that my story would have easily been diagnosed with a neural developmental condition, when it was not that in any way. And I grew out of all of my symptoms quite easily. It wasn't something that I had to really even work on when emotional stresses kind of resolved themselves. Interestingly, while I was teaching a lot of kids with ADHD as a classroom teacher and a special educator, I met my husband, who is like really over the top ADHD, like every single symptom, like they put a picture next to ADHD in the dictionary, of him. Basically, yeah, it's him. So my children, one after the next, were diagnosed with ADHD. I was just telling someone that my oldest, who's 24 right now, was rejected from the first kindergarten I tried to sign her up for when she was 3.
Oh,
Because
wow.
she was too opinionated and she was too hyper for the kindergarten teacher to handle. And it was like this elite kindergarten where they only liked children who could stick in boxes. And
Yeah. Obedient ones.
yeah, those, yes. I didn't create any obedient ones at all. But as my kids were being diagnosed with ADHD, it really became very personal. And even though I had already been educating kids with ADHD with tremendous amount of success, to the point where I was really telling parents, hold off on the Ritalin, let me handle them in the classroom, and we did great together. But when it was for my own kids, and the doctors were saying, well, if you love your child, or you're gonna land up messing up their future and their grades,
all
and
that pressure.
tremendous amount of pressure. And even though I knew better, I landed up medicating my children, three out of the 6 of them, for different periods of time. But at the same time, I took that deep dive into really figuring out what was going on for the ADHD story and how to overcome these symptoms, and came up with some incredible understandings, which I hope to share with you throughout our conversation, which landed up birthing the 2 books that I wrote on the topic.
Perfect. So first and foremost, what causes ADHD?
So that's such a great question, because really, and I'm going to give you a different answer than anyone else will. After 30 years of up close personal contact with ADHD, I will say that it's a clash between a healthy child and their environment. And and that expresses itself in so many different ways. I'll just give you a few examples. The first one is the one that people call much more the genetic one, which would be like an instant gratification personality. It's that here and now, fun, dangerous kid, like, the one who's always on the edge but never follows through. Starts everything but doesn't finish them. So there's, and is impulsive. So that has a much more genetic element to it. But that child is, once again, a healthy child. We cannot find anything wrong with that child's brain in 95% of the cases, according to the best studies we have. And that child's in clashing with their environment today, which is a classroom environment with a lot of rules and a lot of sitting. But put that child into a different environment where they could roam free, they could build, they could create. Like I'll give you, one of my sons during the nasty COVID lockdown. So he's not the sort that you lock down. Like there's certain people you just don't lock down, and we all have to just accept that. And he built like one of these Dr. Seuss looking cars during the lockdown, and he did more during that lockdown than any other kid his age in the neighborhood put together. So put him in the right environment. This healthy, incredibly bright kid who's a genius with building things came alive. So that's one example, but then we have like screen addiction and gut dysbiosis and sleep issues and trauma, and the list goes on from there.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And I love your answer because, and the part that I love is every kid is different, where they're not all the same, and the learning techniques are not all the same, but in school, it's just one way only, sitting, like your son's probably more of a hands-on physical learner, more so than like sitting down, having to be proper, like obedient, like we said earlier. And it's almost like we need to change the culture of how we teach our children, because there needs to be different options than just the one way and like that one standard way that you have to abide by. Like, I feel like there needs to be schools that offer different avenues with the same outcome, but different techniques, like a more hands-on type of school, and I think that's something that would be great globally, honestly, because, we're not all the same, and offer those things. And we stifle children's creativity. And that could be probably one of the things too, because it's like they want to do something in a different way, but their brain can't really function to do it the way they're supposed to do it, because like they have this calling to try to do it this way. And then they just give up on it because it's like, oh, that's obviously not, if it can't be this way, then there's no other way, because we don't teach our kids to think critically about other situations. You know what I mean? It's like a deep avenue. Anyway.
Oh my God, this is such a big dream. This is such a big dream. I'll tell you, I had a conversation, such a heavy conversation with a really frustrated mother today. The school year is slowly starting, and I know that it starts officially, I think, on the 5th of September, but where I live, it starts on the 1st for some groups, and then even a little bit earlier for others.
You're in school already.
You have some kids in school.
They're in school already. Yeah, they're on their like 3rd week. We're in August.
Oh, are you in Texas? Where are you?
No, I'm in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas. Okay, yeah. So some states start earlier, and that's great for them. But this mother, she called me so broken. She says the school's screaming ADHD. His behavior's great. He gets straight A's. He's wonderful student. What's the problem, and why are they screaming it? Because there's a certain style where they have like the teacher lectures for about an hour and a half straight. And the kids are not writing, they're just listening.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, he can't just sit there and listen. I said, this is a brilliant child rebelling. He's just like, I'm not understimulated. It's impossible for me to sit here.
Yeah,
this is what you
can't even do it.
And no one could do it. I can't do it. I'm a college.
I know. I can't do
during
it.
my lectures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to be very careful that we're not creating an environment that's really repels learning.
Yeah. And so this is going to be kind of like a two part question. So the first part is, how can someone overcome the ADHD symptoms naturally? And then my second part is, what is your thoughts on like the medication for ADHD? Do you think it's safe and effective? So we have like the holistic side, I would think, versus, the medicated side. I would love to know like your thoughts on this.
So those were 2 very tiny questions. I'll see if I can them.
I know, yeah, they're pretty large.
It's funny. I like I mentioned before, I wrote 2 books. It's a hyperhealing series. And the first book addresses your first question, and the second addresses your second question. So that's how big that answer is. So holistically, how do we deal with ADHD symptoms? The most important thing we've got to do is find out why that particular person is struggling with the symptoms to begin with. So if it's trauma-based, then we need to go into a trauma-based therapy where a child is getting treatment and support and making sure that their environment is not feeding more and more trauma. If it's diet-based, we're going to see it in all sorts of physiological issues like asthma, allergies, autoimmune conditions, bad responses to vaccines, C-section births, things like that, kids with rashes, runny noses all the time, kids that are not doing well physiologically, the first place I go is to the gut. And I have a special diet. It's called the 30-day challenge, which is in my book as well. And then we're looking at other things like screen addiction, which is a huge problem for like literally all of our kids. And it's a desperate situation, I think. And the best thing we ever do for our children is do a screen fast. And that's something I highly recommend, because within 3 weeks of weaning our children away from screens, they become delicious, delightful people.
Oh my God. I noticed the difference in my son 100%. When he's on the iPad, he's a lot more like angry, reactive, like get away from me, frustrated, and just kind of like not the sweet boy that we know that's inside. And then when he's been away from the screen, he's just more cheerful. He wants to color more. And yeah, I've noticed such a difference. So any parent out there, if you have like having problems with tantrums and stuff and you use the iPad, take it away.
Because those screens cause cortisol surges, and our kids are really in fight and flight mode all the time, which wears them down and makes them angry, frustrated, impulsive kids. And then we have the instant gratification personality, which has a 3-step plan of overcoming, and that's slightly more challenging. We're working with our communication because that kid wants our attention more than anything on the planet. So therefore we need to focus on how we're communicating. Are we communicating with anger and yelling? That kid's going to invite more anger and yelling. If we're communicating with confidence and love, then that's what the child's going to invite. Then we're working on discipline, learning how to follow schedules, learning how to listen nicely, things like that. And of course, discipline of punishment and rewards. And that's a 3-pronged plan for that kind of child. But every single ADHD symptom is curable. We can overcome every single one of them if we really focus on the child instead of focusing on the disorder.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned real quick is the gut and like the nutrition. And especially here in the United States, the food is horrible and the kids' diets are horrible here in the United States. And I love that in your book, you have that 30-day challenge, because I think, I'm a victim of it. I'm totally not perfect. Like, I think like, my kids are picky. I need to have them better on their diets. And I know that part of their issues is because they have horrible diets, and it's a hard thing. But I love that. And it is really important, gut health.
Yeah. So that's something I really, and it's interesting because that's the section that the parents are most resistant to. And I get it.
They don't.
It's so hard to feed our kids. It's so hard. And I'll tell you something incredible. I had 2 kids diagnosed with celiac, and through diet, not just staying away from gluten, but through a complete diet overhaul and a healing of their guts, both of them completely overcame celiac and are able to now eat gluten like regular kid. So that's how powerful diet is. And I beg parents to really just give it a shot, just the 30 days, and see what happens, because it can be miraculous for your family. We just made a party about it because they're so happy. They feel alive again. It's really just an unbelievable thing. And I'm happy for anyone to turn to me and ask me what they did, because you don't want to have to deal with celiac your whole life, for sure. So to get to your second question, and I have a full book on that, and it's called Show Me the Science, the Hyper Healing Show Me the Science, because I really delve into the science of the disorder itself. Where does it come from? Is it an actual disorder, or is it a human construct? My conclusion is human construct. But besides for that, is it safe, or are the medications safe and effective? They are definitely effective short-term for just about everyone. 80% of kids and adults who take it will have some pretty solid effect in the short term. And I'm talking about less than a year.
Okay.
But in the long term, every long-term study has been put out, and I have all the studies listed, very, very well documented. Every single long-term study really points us to the kids that are medicated do much more poorly in every single area than their unmedicated ADHD peers.
Yeah.
And they start to go backwards because the medication does affect the brain. And the brain becomes addicted. And parents say, well, my kid's not addicted. He doesn't even want to take the pill. And I say, that's right, because your kid's smart.
Yeah.
But the body becomes addicted. And that's why the kids have these awful rebounds at the end of the day, because their body wants another hit of whatever it is you're giving it. So I would say short term, it's effective and probably safe. It does a long term, it's not effective. And very probably not safe. It stunts growth, and that's documented. And it also can cause, in 1 in 10 kids, a secondary psychiatric condition, which is something we really have to think about, because we are kind of gambling with our children's future. We're getting a calmer elementary school kid, but we might be landing up with a kid who's gathering psychiatric conditions as they go along, just because of the pills.
Yeah. No.
It's again,
I feel like also it would slow a child down, like you said, they do poorly than their non-medicated peers, is because we're turning off who they are. You know what I mean? And it's like their soul is like being shut down. It's like you're taking their vibrancy and you're like lowering it, and they're not going to like be their best self because you're literally shutting them off. You know, there's how I feel with like the medication. And it's like, yeah, it's just a crazy world. It's like everything is like, here, just take a pill, you'll be done. But there's so many other alternatives to do.
Exercise is one of my favorites, by the way.
What is it?
Exercise is so powerful for focus.
Yeah, and for children need to be active, and they're not active anymore. They're just on their iPads. I think my generation was the last generation where we were like indoor, outdoor, but like outdoor most of the time. And like now playgrounds are empty. You don't see too many kids running around on the streets, like it's just a different world, and people are stuck playing video games. And yeah, so, and we were kind of talking earlier about, the education system and how like maybe there should be different types of school options for learning. But since we don't have that right now, what can parents and teachers do to help children with ADHD overcome these symptoms?
So that's interesting. I'm actually giving out that chapter of my book for free right now, as in preparation for the school year. It's my first day support, because that's a chapter about the bridge between home and school, because it's so important that we have great communication with the teacher, and we know that the teacher is our ally. And I know, as a mom of kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, we often feel very combative with the teachers, especially since they want us to do things a certain way, and we might have opinions that differ, or our kid is causing the teacher so much anxiety that it becomes like really unpleasant.
Conflict battle. Yeah,
it's so unpleasant to be that parent.
And we had that once with a teacher at the school, and we moved him classrooms, and it was like a whole different ball game, you know what I mean? And he expects so much more. So yeah.
So there's a ton that parents could do working with the teacher and giving support on both sides. I do like to work with teachers on discipline, on being very clear with the rules of the classroom, and also being very clear with what the consequences are. And when I say consequence, I mean positive and negative. Teachers are like, well, this is the punishments. And I'm like, wait 1 second, but what's the reward when the kid actually does something right? We have to reward good choices, and we forget about that. We also have to have a lot of a routine and organization in the classroom, because our children with the ADHD, when they come into the classroom, they feel panicked, and they immediately start misbehaving, because they want to know where the red lines are, where I can't cross, where I can't cross. And they're not doing that to misbehave. They're doing that because they're stressed by this new environment.
Yeah. You're like on fight or flight mode.
Exactly. There it is. They're always there. We also, a lot of them are super bright. As a matter of fact, that studies show that they have higher IQs. So often they'll finish an assignment quickly, and then they immediately start looking around to bother someone or make a silly noise or get some good feedback. So I always had an enrichment corner where my students could get up freely and go there and find something super interesting to do and sit quietly. So there was never a lag in time. I
Yeah.
also, this is something that I recommend to all teachers, that you have a figure 8 painted or taped onto the floor in your classroom where the kids can walk the 8
Okay.
when they just need to walk, because I'm not into sending the kid out of the classroom because that feels like a punishment. I
Yeah.
want them I want them near me. I want them to know that they are here and they're supposed to be here, and they are very important members of our classroom. So if they need to walk that 8, even or backwards with a mirror, they could do that too, but they get to walk around a couple of times, get off some energy, get refocused, and come sit right back down. If I am a disciplined teacher, then that's not going to bother me. That
Yeah.
kids are standing up and walking around and getting a little bit of focus back. There's so many things that the teacher can do.
Why an 8? Or is there a reason why
Well,
it's an 8? Or
Well, the 8 is, well, we often use the 8, and physical and occupational therapists know a lot about this, crossing the center line of the body. So we, like, when we draw an 8, we're crossing center line, which like gets your right and your left brain like
okay.
synthesized. But when you have it down there, you don't want a number that like then they could walk off of it and disappear.
Yeah.
So it keeps them contained, but
Mhm.
there is that crossover. So especially if they do have to, especially if they're doing it backwards of the mirror, they are kind of getting their right and left brain working together, which
Oh,
is
perfect.
what, that's when we lose them, when they're not working together.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. So before I dive into my 4 questions, is there any last words you would like to give to the audience?
Sure. As a mom of at least 5 kids diagnosed with ADHD, I'm ignoring the 6th diagnosis. I'm like, that's it. I'm done. She's fine. But I would say that it's a very challenging process, and we get a lot of negative feedback. We always kind of feel
Mhm.
on the defensive, and when our kid tantrums in the middle of the supermarket, like, we feel very ashamed and we might lash out at our children. But what really strengthens me is always being very, very grateful and just saying these kids are healthy gifts from God. And I'm so fortunate to be their mother, and they're gonna go through their journey.
All right, Abigail, this has been such an interesting conversation. I've totally enjoyed it. And I have my 4 questions that I ask all my guests, and I can't wait to know what your answers are. And my first question to you is, who and what inspires you?
So I would have to say that it's my children.
Mhm.
Um, and they really have been. I told my kids the other day that as much as I've raised them, they've raised me, and they've helped me become a kind, compassionate, patient person. And I admire them so much. I admire their perseverance and their excitement for life. And yeah, they're my heroes for sure.
Perfect. And then my second question is, what is something you wished you knew when you were younger?
I wished I knew that not everything that I was experiencing was my fault,
Mm,
and that it was a something that was going on in my environment, and that I could ask for help. And I wish that every child had that message, because
yeah.
we tend to tack things onto the child and say it's your problem or it's your fault,
Mm,
and in most cases it's not true.
yeah. Yeah, that is a great reminder. And then my third question is, what's the essential part of your daily routine?
Well, it's definitely getting my guys out with a nice breakfast, but the my favorite part of my routine is going to CrossFit. That changes my day. I love it. I'm addicted to it.
Yeah, no, I've done CrossFit. It's nice. It definitely kicks your butt for sure.
Oh my God. Yes, that's why I love it.
Yeah. And then my fourth question and the final one is the best advice you've ever received.
Okay, so this is advice I got from one of my son's high school principals, and raising teenagers. I don't know how old your kids are. If you look really young, so your kids are probably not teenagers yet.
They're like 2 and 5. I can't even imagine them being like grown men or teenagers.
Well,
or whatever.
take your vitamins, as my mother-in-law likes to say, because you have special things ahead of you. But he said, when you're raising teenagers, and that my youngest just became a teenager, so I'm at this for a very long time. He says, talk to the walls, because when your children sleep, the walls will just open up and whisper to them, meaning the way you behave. You don't need to talk directly to your teenagers and give them lectures and tell them how to be good, ethical, moral, kind people. You have to be good, ethical, moral, kind people, and the walls of your house absorb your behavior, and they will mimic it.
Yeah.
They will choose to mimic it without the lectures. And I talk to the walls all the time.
Yeah. I say things aren't taught, they're caught. So
Yeah, nice.
yeah. Yeah. I heard that once and I was like, that rings so true, like they just pick it up. You're not teaching them. They're just catching the behaviors and how you go by your life. And, it's amazing. They're like little.
And what's terrifying about teenagers, by the way, is that they mimic you. And then you get to actually, it's like they're holding up this big fat mirror in front of your face, and you get to see all of your eyeball rolls and all of your sarcasm and all that stuff. Because they, like, unless you clean up your act early, they've picked it all up and they just dump it right back at you, Mom. That's what they do.
That's true. Okay. Oh my God. All right. Pray for me. No, I'm good. But all right, Abigail, thank you so much for coming on this week's episode of Not Your Mama's podcast. It was such a fruitful conversation. I feel like we've learned so much about ADHD, and I think you've empowered, other parents out there for like other alternatives, and hopefully they can get their hands on your book. All of her links are down below in the show notes. Don't be shy. Go say hi. And thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.